Muy buenos días, estimados hermanos y amigos. Una vez más estamos aquí con ustedes con deseo de saludarles en el nombre admirable, nombre glorioso, nombre sublime, el nombre de nuestro gran Dios y Salvador Jesucristo, el Señor. Esto es Sembrando con Fe y Esperanza. Bienvenidos.
Five objections. A. Weak anthropic principle. Some argue that since we could not exist in a universe that was not conducive to our existence, that is, fine-tuned, we should not be surprised that the universe is fine-tuned. Philosopher John Leslie expands on this need for explanation in his famous firing squad analogy. Suppose 50 trained sharpshooters are lined up to take your life, and they all miss. You could hardly dismiss this occurrence by saying, if they hadn't all missed me, then I shouldn't be contemplating the matter, so I mustn't be surprised that they missed. You should still be surprised that you are alive, given the enormous unlikelihood of all the sharpshooters missing their mark. Your survival demands an explanation, and so does the fine-tuning of the laws of the universe. B. The multiverse theory. Perhaps the most common naturalistic response to the fine-tuning argument is the so-called multiverse theory, or the many worlds hypothesis. According to this theory, there are many universes, perhaps infinite, and each operates according to unique laws and constants. While most universes would not sustain life, inevitably some would. Currently, the scientific community actively debates the validity of multiverse models. Although far from settled, there is scientific support for the existence of a multiverse. The key question remains, though, does living in a multiverse undermine the case for God? Distinguished philosopher Robin Collins provides multiple reasons for God's existence in the context of multiverse theory. First, we should prefer the hypothesis that naturally flows from the evidence and for which we have independent confirmation. Collins observes, in the case of fine-tuning, we already know that minds often produce fine-tuned devices, such as Swiss watches. Postulating God, a supermind, as the explanation of fine-tuning, therefore, is a natural extrapolation from what we already observe minds to do. Second, a many universes generator would seemingly need to be designed as well. It stands to reason, therefore, that if these laws were slightly different, the generator probably would not be able to produce any universes that could sustain life. After all, even my bread machine has to be made just right in order to work properly. And it only produces loaves of bread, not universes. Third, the multiverse theory cannot explain other features of the universe that exhibit apparent design. Collins explains. For example, many physicists, such as Albert Einstein, have observed that the basic laws of physics exhibit an extraordinary degree of beauty, elegance, harmony, and ingenuity. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg, for instance, devotes a whole chapter in his book Dreams of a Final Theory, explaining how the criteria of beauty and elegance are commonly used to guide physicists in formulating the right laws. Now, such beauty, elegance, and ingenuity make sense if the universe was designed by God. Under the atheistic many universes hypothesis, however, there is no reason to expect the fundamental laws to be elegant or beautiful. Astrophysicist Jeffrey Zweerink provides a fair synopsis of the present standing of the fine-tuning argument in light of the multiverse challenge. Though some multiverse models appear to undermine the teleological argument, they still exhibit design and fine-tuning. Granted, the design argument is more subtle and complex if a multiverse actually exists. However, as with the cosmological argument, studies of the multiverse ultimately make the teleological argument more robust. C. The origin of life. 1. The problem of the origin of life. Virtually the entire scientific community agrees the problem of life's origin is unsolved. The problem of life's beginning has become so difficult that Harvard University launched a $100 million research program to address it. As Harvard biologist Andy Knoll said, the short answer is we don't really know how life originated on this planet. There have been a variety of experiments that tell us some possible roads, but we remain in substantial ignorance. How deep is the problem of explaining the origin of life? Geneticist Michael Denton explains. In Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, I wrote, Between a living cell and the most highly ordered non-biological system, there is a chasm as vast and absolute as it is possible to conceive. 30 years on, the situation is entirely unchanged. Despite a vast increase in knowledge of supramolecular chemistry and of cell and molecular biology, the unexpected discovery of ribosomes, and an enormous effort, both experimental and hypothetical, devoted to providing a gradualistic, functionalist account of the origin of life in terms of a long series of less complex functional replicating systems, for example the much-touted RNA world, leading from chemistry to the cell, no one has provided even the vaguest outlines of a feasible scenario, let alone a convincing one. A yawning gap still persists, empirical and theoretical. 2. The sophistication of the cell. Life's origin is so difficult to explain because life itself is so remarkably complex and sophisticated. During the time of Darwin, scientists believed life was rather simple, and thus there would likely emerge an explanation for how it could arise naturally. But the opposite has turned out to be true. The more we learn about the cell, the greater complexity and technological prowess we discover. In fact, nearly every feature of our own advanced technology can be found in the cell. Biologists today describe the cell using language reminiscent of engineering and computer science. They regularly use terms such as genetic code, information processing system, and signal transduction. Influential atheist Richard Dawkins writes, "Apart from differences in jargon, the pages of a molecular biology journal might be interchanged with those of a computer engineering journal." With the discovery of the structure of DNA in 1953, scientists learned that information is basic to life. The information for organizing proteins is stored in 4 nucleotide bases: guanine, G, adenine, A, thymine, T, and cytosine, C. These 4 bases function as letters of an alphabet, creating meaningful arrangements, which is why biologists regularly refer to DNA and RNA as carriers of information. The amount of information in the human body is outright staggering. The human body has an average of 100 trillion cells. In a single cell, the DNA contains the informational equivalent of roughly 8,000 books. If the DNA from one cell were uncoiled, it would extend to about 3 meters in length. Thus, if the DNA in an adult human were strung together, it would stretch from Earth to the Sun and back roughly 70 times. But DNA does not just store information. In combination with other cellular systems, it also processes information. Bill Gates likens DNA to a computer program, though far more advanced than any software humans have invented. This is why Davies says, life is more than just complex chemical reactions. The cell is also an information storing, processing, and replicating system. We need to explain the origin of this information and the way in which the information processing machinery came to exist. Flew, once an avowed atheist who, following the evidence, came to believe in the existence of God, clearly states the nature of the problem of the origin of life. How can a universe of mindless matter produce beings with intrinsic ends, self-replicating capabilities, and coded chemistry? 3. Explanations for the origin of life. A. Chance. What are the odds that random interactions of prebiotic soup would generate a single functional protein? Based on the work of Douglas Axe, Meyer concludes, the calculation can be made by multiplying the 3 independent probabilities by one another. The probability of incorporating only peptide bonds, 1 in 10 to the 45th. The probability of incorporating only left-handed amino acids, 1 in 10 to the 45th. And the probability of achieving correct amino acid sequencing using Axe's 1 in 10 to the 74th estimate. Making that calculation, multiplying the separate probabilities by adding their exponents, 10 to the 45th plus 45th plus 74th, gives a dramatic answer. The odds of getting even one functional protein of modest length, 150 amino acids, by chance from prebiotic soup is no better than 1 chance in 10 to the 164th. Now consider that there are only 10 to the 80th protons, neutrons, and electrons in the observable universe. Thus, if the odds of finding a functional protein by chance on the first attempt had been 1 in 10 to the 80th, we could have said that's like finding a marked particle, proton, neutron, or electron, a much smaller needle, among all the particles in the universe, a much larger haystack. Unfortunately, the problem is much worse than that. With odds standing at 1 chance in 10 to the 164th of finding a functional protein among the possible 150 amino acid compounds, the probability is 84 orders of magnitude, or powers of 10, smaller than the probability of finding the marked particle in the whole universe. Another way to say that is the probability of finding a functional protein by chance alone is a trillion, 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 trillion times smaller than the odds of finding a single specified particle among all the particles in the universe. B. Energy and self-organization. Could there be some self-organizational principle that causes life to emerge through laws of nature? The general problem with this approach is that energy and self-organization can generate order, but there is no evidence they can generate information. Meyer explains. The astrophysicist Fred Hoyle had a similar way of making the same point. He famously compared the problem of getting life to arise spontaneously from its constituent parts to the problem of getting a 747 airplane to come together from a tornado swirling through a junkyard. An undifferentiated external force is simply too blunt an instrument to accomplish such a task. Energy might scatter parts around randomly. Energy might sweep parts into an orderly structure, such as a vortex or funnel cloud. But energy alone will not assemble a group of parts into a highly differentiated or functionally specified system, such as an airplane or cell, or into the informational sequences necessary to build one. C. Design. Naturalistic processes are simply incapable of explaining the complex, information-rich nature of the cell. But there is a third option, if someone is open to looking beyond nature itself. Biochemist Fazali Rana explains, human experience consistently teaches that information emanates from intelligence, whether written in plain or elegant scripts. Messages initiate in a mind. In whatever form information takes, it's not limited to communicating ideas, needs, and desires between human minds. Information has become an integral part of modern technology. Designers and engineers routinely develop and refine information systems. Computer technologies, among many other developing innovations, fundamentally depend upon such constructs. Over the last 40 years, biochemists have come to recognize that the cell's biological systems are also, at their essence, information-based. Proteins, DNA, and even oligosaccharides are information-rich molecules. By analogy, these discoveries reinforce the biochemical design argument. This is not a God of the gaps argument using God as an explanation for a phenomenon presently inexplicable. While scientists certainly have an incomplete understanding of life's chemistry, the argument to design from DNA is based upon positive evidence of what we do know about the abilities of intelligent agents to produce information-rich systems. As with the origin of the universe and the fine-tuning of the laws of nature, the origin of life poses a seemingly intractable problem for naturalism. D. The origin of consciousness. 1. The challenge of consciousness. The existence and reality of consciousness presents one of the most pressing challenges to naturalism. As we have said, metaphysical naturalism is the view that only physical things exist. As a result, everything that exists should be describable in physical terminology, including properties such as weight, size, and location. But there are certain subjective aspects of the world that resist such explanation. Analytic philosopher Paul Copan explains the challenge posed by consciousness. Here's the problem, though. When we consult physics textbooks to understand what matter is, there's nothing psychological, subjective, or mental about matter. Matter might be described as having the properties of spatial location, spatial extension, weight, texture, color, shape, size, density, mass, or atomic or chemical composition. But what will always be missing in these textbooks describing matter is consciousness as a characteristic or property of matter. The assumption is that matter is different than mind. we're left wondering, how could matter produce mind? How could non-conscious material produce consciousness? Even atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel notes how consciousness raises a problem for naturalism. Consciousness is the most conspicuous obstacle to a comprehensive naturalism that relies only on the resources of physical science. The existence of consciousness seems to imply that the physical description of the universe, in spite of its richness and explanatory power, is only part of the truth, and that the natural order is far less austere than it would be if physics and chemistry accounted for everything. If we take this problem seriously and follow out its implications, it threatens to unravel the entire naturalistic world picture. Yet it is very difficult to imagine a viable alternative. 2. Naturalistic explanations for consciousness. Naturalists have offered a variety of explanations for consciousness. We will consider 3 popular explanations, although there are many more. A. Behaviorism. Definition. While various behaviorist explanations hope to account for consciousness, they commonly reduce mental attributes to some observable behavior. Response. Nagel observes, "It is certainly true that mental phenomena have behavioral manifestations, which supply our main evidence for them in other creatures. Yet all these theories seem insufficient as analyses of the mental because they leave out something essential that lies beyond the externally observable grounds for attributing mental states to others, namely, the aspect of mental phenomena that is evidence from first-person inner point of view of the conscious subject. For example, the way sugar tastes to you or the way red looks or anger feels, each of which seems to be something more than the behavioral responses and discriminatory capacities that these experiences explain. Behaviorism leaves out the inner mental state itself." B. Evolution. Definition. Consciousness emerges from the process of natural selection, acting upon random mutation, and offers survival advantages to species. Response. Philosopher Colin McGinn notes, "But in the case of consciousness, the Darwinian explanation does not tell us what we need to know, for the simple reason that it is unclear how matter can be so organized as to create a conscious being. The problem is in the raw materials. It looks as if, with consciousness, a new kind of reality has been injected into the universe, instead of just a recombination of the old realities. Even if minds showed no hint of design, the same old problem would exist. How can mere matter originate consciousness? How did evolution convert the water of biological tissue into the wine of consciousness?" C. The mind is the brain. Definition. This approach claims the mind is the brain. In other words, mind and brain are simply 2 different terms that refer to the same physical reality. Response. Copen notes, "The fact that we can't locate, weigh, or die thoughts, as we can physical objects, reveals the inadequacy of a view identifying the physical with the mental soulish, or reducing the mind-soul to the physical. Brains just don't have the same properties that minds or souls have, and minds don't have the same properties brains do. Therefore, the mental can't be identical with the brain, or even produced by the physical brain." 3. Worldview implications. There are other naturalistic attempts at explaining consciousness beyond what we have explored here. Nevertheless, the truth is, says Moreland, that naturalism has no plausible way to explain the appearance of emergent mental properties in the cosmos. And yet, this leaves naturalism in a bind, as philosopher Richard Swinburne observes. We cannot describe the world fully if we use only terms denoting physical properties. Any worldview which denies the existence of experienced sensations of blueness or loudness or pain does not describe how things are. That this is so stares us in the face. According to noted neuroscientist Robert Lawrence Kuhn, neuroscientists and many philosophers have typically planted themselves firmly on the materialist, naturalist side. But a growing number of scientists now believe that materialism cannot wholly explain the sense of I am that undergirds consciousness. Given how intractable the problem of consciousness is for naturalism, philosopher and Brown University professor Jaegwon Kim concludes, "But if a whole system of phenomena that are prima facie not among basic physical phenomena resists physical explanation, and especially if we don't even know where or how to begin, it would be time to re-examine one's physicalist commitments." And yet, along with the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, and the origin of life, the existence of consciousness fits naturally within the theistic worldview. If God is a supremely conscious being and He has created us, then it makes perfect sense for human beings to be conscious agents who experience the world. God has both the power and incentive to create conscious beings. E. The existence of free will. 1. Is free will an illusion? The perception of free will is an unavoidable aspect of human experience. Although influenced by our environment and genes, we believe we make choices that are truly up to us. We condemn terrorists for their immoral actions because we believe they should have known better. And we praise individuals who personally sacrifice for the betterment of others because we realize they didn't have to be selfless. And yet, if naturalism were true, our belief in free will would be baseless. Nagel, an atheist philosopher, asserts, "There is no room for agency in a world of neural impulses, chemical reactions, and bone and muscle movements." In slight contrast, skeptic Michael Shermer believes free will is ultimately insoluble, and so we might as well just pretend we have it. Free will is a useful fiction. I feel as if I have free will, even though I know we live in a determined universe. This fiction is so useful that I act as if I have free will, but you don't. You do the same. Since the problem may be an insoluble one, why not act as if you do have free will, gaining the emotional gratification and social benefits that go along with it? 2. The intuition of free will. Belief in free will is an intuition held by people of varying worldviews, including many atheists. Copen notes, "But if this intuition is so common, maybe there is something to it. According to the common-sense principle of credulity, we should accept the basic reliability of our everyday intuitions, whether about our freedom, the general trustworthiness of our rational faculties and sense perceptions, or our moral intuitions about the wrongness of murder, rape, and theft. The burden of proof is upon the one who would deny these obvious features of our daily lives." 3. A problem for determinism, denying rationality. Recently Sean, led a group of high school students to Berkeley to interact with some skeptics, agnostics, and atheists. One evening, for a public conversation about the evidence for and against God, we met with a free-thinking student group from Cal Berkeley. After the discussion, I met a student who said she had recently converted from believing in free will to being a determinist. I simply asked her why she changed her mind, and she effectively said, "I used to believe in free will until I really examined the evidence. I studied both the philosophy and science behind the issue and have become convinced that free will is an illusion." After a moment of reflection, I simply asked her another question. "So, you weighed the evidence on both sides of the debate and freely chose to give up belief in free will and become a determinist. Is that right?" She hesitated to respond because she saw the tension. In other words, she claimed to be a determinist, which implies that her beliefs are not up to her, but then offered intellectual reasons for her decision as if she were a free agent who could rationally examine evidence and follow it where it leads. She wanted it both ways, but unfortunately, her naturalistic worldview wouldn't allow it, leaving her two options. 1. Give up naturalism and adopt a worldview that allows for free will, such as Christianity, or 2. Become a more consistent naturalist and admit that free will is an illusion and that her beliefs really weren't up to her in the way she thought they were. Influential atheist Sam Harris, after rightly emphasizing the importance of the question of free will, also concludes that free will is an illusion. In his book Free Will, Harris claims we are not the conscious source of our actions and could not have behaved differently in the past from how we did. He says, "I, as the conscious witness of my experience, no more initiate events in my prefrontal cortex than I cause my heart to beat." Harris explains, "The brain is a physical system, entirely beholden to the laws of nature, and there is every reason to believe that changes in its functional state and material structure entirely dictate our thoughts and actions." Harris rightly points out that there are three main approaches to the problem of free will: determinism, libertarianism, and compatibilism. He then says, Today, the only philosophically respectable way to endorse free will is to be a compatibilist. But if determinism were true, as Harris's view seems to imply, why would any position be philosophically respectable or unrespectable? After all, on his view, people are determined to hold their beliefs, whether compatibilist, libertarian, or determinist, by forces outside of their control. If the people who hold beliefs couldn't have believed differently, there is no need to critique or praise another's position. If his critique results merely from chemicals moving in his brain, nothing could make his chemicals more respectable than others. Furthermore, Harris argues that giving up free will and becoming more aware of the background causes of our feelings allows people to have greater creative control over their lives. Getting behind our conscious thoughts and feelings, says Harris, can allow us to steer a more intelligent course through our lives. However, clearly the idea of steering a more intelligent course through life seems to imply an agent view of causation, that there is a self beyond the physical world of cause and effect. According to naturalism, however, the belief that we can steer our lives is an illusion. All of our beliefs and behavior are entirely the result of forces outside our control. In one breath, Harris says all our beliefs are determined, but then in another he seems to speak as if we really should take control over the course of our lives. Determinists might push back and suggest that minds can be changed with the right stimuli of forces and counterforces, which are part of the larger cause-effect realm. Thus, we feel as if we are making free choices, but in reality these feelings are explainable by prior physical states and interactions. This is an important objection, which comes at a high cost, the undermining of rationality. According to J.P. Moreland, rationality seems to require an agent view of the human person, which involves these four theses. 1. I must be able to deliberate, to reflect about what I am going to do. I deliberate about my behavior and not that of others, future events and not past ones, courses of action which I have not already settled. These facts of deliberation make sense only if I assumed that my actions are up to me to perform or not perform. 2. I must have free will, that is, given choices A and B, I can genuinely do both. If I do A, I could have done otherwise. I could have chosen B. The past and present do not physically determine only one future. The future is open and depends to some extent on my free choices. 3. I am an agent. My acts are often self-caused. I am the absolute origin of my acts. My prior mental or physical states are not sufficient to determine what I will do. I must act as an agent. 4. Free will is incompatible with physical determinism. They cannot both be true at the same time. Of course, this doesn't prove that free will is real and that naturalism is false. Free will may ultimately be an illusion, as determinists such as Harris suggest. But embracing determinism comes at a cost that undermines our common-sense understanding of free will and rationality. 4. Conclusion. We recognize that we have only scratched the surface of the issue of free will. We have not considered many objections to the existence of free will, nor their responses. For a helpful resource that considers various attempts to explain free will using naturalistic explanations, and why these explanations fall short, see God's Crime Scene by J. Warner Wallace. For the sake of our discussion, we simply note that the experience of free will is inexplicable for naturalists, which they themselves often admit. Consistent naturalists must either admit that free will is an illusion or hope that someday an explanation emerges. Naturalism cannot account for our deep-seated, common sense, and daily experience that we are agents who make decisions that are up to us. Theists, though, have no such problem. After all, if God is a personal, free being who can choose to act and has created us in His image, then we have good reason to believe we genuinely experience free will.
La Iglesia Pentecostal Unida Latinoamericana en Baltimore Nos estamos reuniendo en la 8301 Liberty Road. 8301 Liberty Road, Windsor Mill, Maryland 21244. Y nuestras reuniones son los días domingo a las 8 de la mañana. Domingo 8 de la mañana tenemos el servicio de adoración, alabanza y enseñanza de la palabra de Dios. Venga juntamente con su familia y allegados. Serán todos bienvenidos a nuestra reunión dominical. Recuerde, Jesucristo es el verdadero Dios y la vida eterna. Primera de Juan 5:20. Y si otros días madrugamos a buscar la comida que perece, ¿por qué no hacerlo el día domingo para buscar la comida que a vida eterna permanece? Le esperamos.